Hey everyone. Okay, so today I want to talk about misophonia, which is a topic that's very close to my heart because it's something that I have personally struggled with for most of, if not my entire life. Um, it's a condition that is not very well understood or researched. It has not yet made its way into the DSM-5. And to be frank, a lot of therapists and doctors don't even really know about it or understand it. So getting help, if you are someone who struggles with this condition, can be quite difficult. I would say probably the best thing that you can do is educate yourself and work to advocate for yourself and to learn about the condition and specifically how you experience it. And so in this video, I want to talk mostly about my own experience with misophonia. I don't want to try and talk about how people in general struggle with misophonia because if there's one thing that I've learned um, through reading about the condition and reading other people's stories and through being aware of my own experiences, it's that people do really experience it quite differently. It can manifest differently in individuals. And so I want to try and stick, but like for the sake of fairness and for the sake of presenting this topic in a way that does it justice, I want to stick mostly to my own experiences. So, what is misophonia? Well, I just want to talk about what it's not. First of all, it's not tinnitus, which is a kind of a persistent ringing sound that some people hear in their ears. And it's also not hyperacusis, which is when people experience everyday sounds as being too loud. For people who suffer from misophonia, it's not the volume of the sounds which is the problem. It is the way that they experience those sounds. It's the emotions that are attached to the sounds, which presents the difficulty for people who struggle with misophonia. Um, And so misophonia has been described as sound sensitivity or sound rage. I'm going to pull up a definition from Wikipedia in a moment and read from it. So just to give you kind of a more complete definition, but it's essentially having kind of extreme emotional responses to particular sounds. And the types of sounds that provoke those emotional reactions or that that trigger those emotional responses varies from one person to another, although there are sort of a lot of common themes, but it's not kind of an exhaustive list. People can be triggered by different sounds and the emotions themselves can be slightly different. But having said that, let me just pull up this definition from Wikipedia. I'm just going to be reading from it here, a couple of paragraphs. So, misophonia or selective sound sensitivity syndrome or sound rage is a disorder of decreased tolerance to specific sounds or their associated stimuli or cues. These cues, known as triggers, are experienced as unpleasant or distressing and tend to evoke strong negative emotional, physiological, and behavioral responses that are not seen in most other people. Misophonia and misophonic symptoms can adversely affect the ability to achieve life goals and enjoy social situations. It was first recognized in 2001, though it is still not in the DSM-5 or any similar manual. For this reason, it has been called a neglected disorder. Reactions to trigger sounds range from annoyance to anger, with possible activation of the fight or flight response. Misophonia responses do not seem to be elicited by the loudness of the sound, but rather by its specific pattern or meaning to the hearer. Triggers are commonly repetitive stimuli and are primarily, but not exclusively, related to the human body, such as chewing, eating, smacking lips, slurping, coughing, throat clearing, sniffing, and swallowing. Once a trigger stimulus is detected, people with misophonia may have difficulty distracting themselves from the stimulus and may experience suffering distress, and or impairment in social, occupational, or academic functioning. The expression of misophonia symptoms varies, as does the severity, which ranges from mild to severe. Some people with misophonia are aware that their reactions to misophonic triggers are disproportionate to the circumstances. Misophonia symptoms are typically first observed in childhood or early adolescence. Studies have shown that misophonia can cause problems in school, work, social life, and family. So I just want to highlight a few things from that definition. Firstly, the page mentions that misophonia is usually triggered by sounds emanating from the human body, such as breathing, coughing, slurping, chewing, those sorts of sounds. And I have seen this to be true. I'm part of a Facebook group for misophonia sufferers in the UK. And I've noticed from a lot of the posts that are posted on that Facebook group that most people seem to be triggered by those human bodily sounds. That seems to be the norm for misophonia. I will say that isn't the case with me. I am not generally overly triggered by human bodily sounds. I am somewhat triggered by them. I can feel like somewhat ill and have like a kind of like almost a revulsion response if I can see someone eating, or if I can kind of hear them eating close by to me, or if I hear someone overly kind of gurgling or clearing their throat or like spitting, which I saw recently. It does produce kind of a strong response, but it's nothing near to the way that certain other sounds trigger me. So I've read that people who have those, who are triggered by those human bodily noises, really can feel quite enraged, and it can cause tremendous distress and anger when they hear those sounds, and it can like make them need to leave the room, and it can make it unbearable to be around those sounds. But for me, it hasn't really been like that with those bodily noises. I can, with a certain amount of focus and with very minimal accommodations, I can be around those sorts of noises like chewing and coughing and that, without experiencing severe distress. I can get past it or get over it. For me, the sounds that trigger me are also humanly created noises, but they tend to be noises that are produced by machinery and by like noise producing implements and tools and equipment. Such specifically, TV noise is incredibly triggering to me. Loud music, especially music with a bass sound, but any kind of overly harsh or overly loud upbeat music that has like a strong beat to it is very triggering to me. Other similar to a radio can be triggering to me depending on the circumstances, but also power tools, and I suppose less so power tools, but specifically like vehicles, cars, motorbikes, quad bikes, specifically like modified vehicles that have been modified to make them louder are very triggering to me. Now, I know some people might think, oh yeah, those noises that you've mentioned, yes, those are annoying. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily like those noises. Does that mean they also suffer from misophonia? Well, no. Loud noises, irritating noises can be kind of a nuisance to a lot of people. The difference is in the emotional response. So for me, when I hear noises like that, especially if I'm in my own home or if I'm in a place that is supposed to be a peaceful sanctuary for me, or that a place where I can't escape, it can cause very severe distress. Generally, If I describe what the experience is actually like for me, um, the first way that I experience it generally is just my brain becomes very alert. It is kind of hypersensitive to that particular trigger noise, and I pick it up immediately, even if it's fairly faint, even if it's not all that loud to begin with. I will pick my brain is kind of attuned and very aware of those sounds, so I can hear them usually long before other people. So the first feeling that I generally experience is that alertness. The next thing I find is happening is my brain is kind of scrambling to see where did the noise come from. So at that point, I might be kind of getting up from what I'm doing. I'm interrupting whatever I was busy with and walking around trying to establish where the noise is coming from and whether that noise is going to be something that is going to continue for a long period of time or whether it's something that is just passing that I don't need to worry about too much. And this is where I suppose the whole emotional journey of misophonia comes in. And for me, it is kind of like a whole emotional and psychological journey that I go on when I hear a trigger sound. So, yeah, initially I'll become very alert to the sound, then I will try to establish what the source of the sound is and whether or not it's a true threat. If it's something which is likely to be gone in just, if it's just a momentary sound, or if it's something which is likely to be gone very quickly, like just someone mowing their lawn or someone quickly using a leaf blower, then that doesn't bother me at all because I know I don't, I know it's just something temporary and passing that I just need to put up with for, the time being, and then it'll be gone. If I am unable to ascertain how long that sound is going to go on for, or if it seems as if it could be a sound that's going to keep recurring over and over again. Prime example, if I move into a new house or a new flat, and I hear, say I share a wall with a neighbor, like as in if I'm living in a townhouse or an apartment, and I share a wall with a neighbor, and one night the neighbor's TV is particularly loud, and I can hear the movie that they're watching quite loudly. Say it's an action movie, and I can hear gunshot sounds from the action movie that they're watching. Um, that would be a situation where my distress would start to ramp up because in that situation, I am not able to ascertain how long that noise is going to go on for. And in particular, it's a situation that is likely to keep recurring. This is probably not going to be the last movie that they ever watch. They're probably going to be watching movies on an ongoing basis. And so I know I'm going to be coming face to face with this trigger regularly as long as I'm home, as long as I am in my house or apartment, I'm going to be hearing the TV anytime they watch a movie. So this is when my brain will start to go into kind of anxiety mode, where I will start worrying, okay, how often do these people watch movies? How often do they have their volume so loud that I can hear it? How often do they watch these sorts of loud action movies where I can hear the individual gunshot sounds from the movie? How long is this movie going to last? Are they going to watch another movie afterwards or are they going to go to bed? These are the sorts of questions that my brain will start to ask. And those sorts of looping thoughts and questions start to generate anxiety. So for me, anxiety is usually as a result of my brain working hard to understand the noise, where it's coming from, and what the pattern of the noise is going to be. That is what generates the anxiety for me. After the anxiety has kind of run its course a little bit, and this may only take a few minutes. These thoughts tend to happen really lightning fast for me because I'm so used to being sensitive to noises like this. Once that anxious loop has gone on for a few minutes, generally the next emotion that I experience is anger. And this is where, combined with the anxiety and the anger combined, tend to start producing physiological responses in my body. So the anger comes from thoughts like, geez, why do they have to listen to that movie so loudly? Um, why can they not use headphones? Do they not realize that we share a wall and that I can hear them? Why do people not care? Why are they so inconsiderate? Did they not think that I might be sleeping or trying to rest or relax from my busy day? Why do people move into a flat and then crank up their TV so loud that their neighbors can hear them? Why does this apartment block not have rules to prevent this from happening? Why do people not use headphones when they listen to loud movies, and they know that neighbors can potentially be disturbed by the noise? All of these will be thoughts that I will be thinking and questions that I will be asking, which will start to generate a feeling of anger in me. Now, I'm just describing my own experience of what misophonia feels like for me and the thoughts and feelings that come along from hearing a trigger sound. For a lot of other people, it'll be, they won't necessarily go through all those individual thought processes and questions that I tend to experience. They will go straight to the emotion and straight to some sort of behavioral response. Like some people, it just very much depends how it manifests. Children who have misophonia will sometimes act out and have a tantrum or a meltdown. An adult with misophonia might start like stomping around the house and getting very upset and angry. I tend to have these looping thoughts and become quite distressed, and I tend to then sort of pace whilst I'm listening to the noise. I find that I will like pace around my house. Because I'm trying to see if there's any other part of the house that I can go to, which is quieter, where I can get a bit of relief from the sound. And B, because I'm just trying to discharge some of the energy that's coming from my body, from the anxiety and the anger that I'm feeling. Sometimes I'll shout or like mutter or swear under my breath, just also to get rid of some of this anger and energy. Um, if it gets bad enough, I, might leave the house and go for a walk and, just really try to. And a lot of that is, it's not only to escape from the noise, but also just to clear the intense emotions and thoughts out of my head and out of my body, and just try to get a little bit of relief from those thoughts and feelings. So you might think, well, you're talking about emotions, you're talking about thoughts, it doesn't sound so bad. But for someone who suffers from misophonia, this whole experience of being triggered by a particular trigger sound is extremely distressing. If you are someone who suffers from anxiety and you've ever had a panic attack, it's very similar to that. I have had panic attacks in the past. Not recently, really. It doesn't really happen these days, but I very vividly remember what that experience is like. The last one I had was like maybe 2 years ago. And the experience of being triggered by a trigger sound is very, very similar to having a panic attack. It is these very intense emotions, very intense distress, which hijacks your brain and your body and makes it virtually impossible to concentrate on anything else. It's very hard to continue the activity that you're doing. It's very hard to think. It's very hard to form any sort of coherent thoughts. It's very hard to override these very intense emotions. And I think for me, what has been particularly challenging is when I've been in situations like this where I've been triggered by a trigger sound, say, for example, a neighbor's TV. The people around me, if I'm with other people, or if I phone someone, let's say I'm in the room with other people at the same time, they will have heard the same noise as me, or sometimes they may not have heard it. Sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, I'm particularly sensitive to the sound, so I might hear the sound before anyone else, and it's only when I bring the sound to their attention that they will even notice it. Or else they might have heard the sound, but a lot of the time they won't experience the same distress as, at having heard the sound as I will. So they will hear the sound, but their reaction to it will be, kind of neutral. They will be like, well, yeah, okay, I hear it, so what? And when I try to explain to them how distressed I'm feeling, or where they can see that I'm stressed out, the responses that I get from other people are often not all that helpful. People are sometimes a little bit amused, sometimes they'll laugh it off, or they'll kind of smile at me and they'll be like, oh, come on, it's not that loud, it's not that bad. Come on, does it really bother you that much? And I think that's the problem, is they kind of think, well, I'm angry or upset or bothered. They don't realize it's actually deeper than that. I'm actually triggered. These responses, as someone who has misophonia, are this distress response is something I have no control over, and it is also deeply, deeply unpleasant for me. It's more than just I don't like the sound. It's more than just I'm bothered by it, or it annoys me, or I would prefer it to not be there. It's far stronger than that. It's far deeper than that. It's a very kind of primal sense of distress. It's a psychological distress that comes with it that I have no control over. Um, and for someone to kind of laugh it off and almost indirectly imply that I'm making too much out of nothing, or that I'm blowing it out of proportion, or that I quote unquote shouldn't be feeling this way, is both very invalidating, and also deeply unhelpful to the situation. So, but this is a response I get a lot from other people, that they don't understand why the trigger sound affects me the way that it does. And I've seen other people who have misophonia say the same thing, that in general, the world at large, really lacks understanding of what misophonia is and how it affects people and how distressing it is to experience as someone who has misophonia. And that people in general are far too apt and far too quick to just brush off the person with misophonia's concerns as them overreacting, or as them being oversensitive, or that they just need to get over it or get used to the sound. It's really not that simple for us. If it were, then, we would be just like everyone else, and we would be able to cope with those sounds with the same level of kind of nonchalance that most people do. But for a person with misophonia, it's not a choice. It's not an option for us to just brush off the sound as if it's nothing. Now, what I found with myself is that with enough gentle work on yourself, and with enough of the right sort of tools and enough patience and kindness with yourself, you can lessen those emotional responses, or at least that's how I found, that's how it's been in my own experience. And you can learn to cope, but you can't eliminate those emotions altogether. And it is really important that the people close to you don't invalidate your experience and don't kind of brush off your feelings as, oh, well, you're just being kind of, I think people a lot of the time are very apt to brush off people with misophonia as just being kind of a diva or as overreacting or as being unreasonable. And they don't realize it is a neurological condition that we have no control over and that we have to work very, very diligently and patiently with in order to try and improve our own quality of life and to improve our own responses to those trigger sounds. So that for me is just a note on how the world at large is, in my experience, and as far as I can tell, in the experience of most other people who have misophonia, the world at large is not a very compassionate place when it comes to sound sensitivity. Because the majority of people are not sensitive to the sounds that trigger us, most people do just want to write it off as you being kind of overly picky or overly sensitive or unreasonable or trying to spoil their fun or just stressing out over nothing, or you just need to kind of get over it, or you just need to get used to it, all those sorts of things. The world at large will often have those sorts of responses. Um, and I would say it's been quite surprising to me how little compassion there really is and how little consideration there is in the world for people with sound sensitivity. So I want to talk specifically about examples and ways in my life that this has specifically impacted me. And the most significant way for me has been in the types of houses that I have been able to live in as a result of my sound sensitivity. So, you know, because my home is my sanctuary, my home is the one place where I want to know that I can have a reasonable degree of quietness and peace. It's always been very important to me to have a quiet home. And the problem is, of course, that a lot of the time when you are, looking for, I'm not a homeowner, I've rented my whole life. And so a lot of the time when you're looking for a place to rent, you are going to be either sharing a wall with a neighbor or you're going to be living in very close proximity to other people. Sadly, a lot of residential areas don't have the luxury of large kind of gardens around, that people don't have the luxury of having individual houses with large gardens around. And even if they do, a lot of the times the neighbors that you have are just not necessarily always considerate. But for me, a lot of the problem is that, especially when I lived in South Africa, I was never able to afford to rent a fully detached house. I was generally always living either in an apartment or a townhouse or, potentially some of the one of the nicest setups that I lived in would be what would have been called in South Africa a granny cottage on someone else's property. So someone who has a large property and has they and their family live in the main house, and then they have a cottage on the property that's kind of separate. And that was often quite a nice setup. But a lot of the time, even so, you would still have the noise of people's dogs, or you would have people, having social gatherings, get-togethers, loud music, people talking loudly right outside your door. So, that still comes with issues. There's noise everywhere you go, and for me, it's always been a bit of a challenge, specifically in terms of housing. But that wasn't too bad. I would say the granny cottage setups were probably the best in terms of quietness and relatively low noise levels. The worst situations for me as someone who suffers with misophonia, and particularly someone who is mostly triggered by TV noise and the noise, other people's music and other people's cars and vehicles. For me, the worst was always living in either an apartment or in a townhouse where I was actually physically sharing a wall with someone. Um, and honestly, the noises that I heard from my neighbors just nearly drove me insane. It would range from one of the apartments that I lived in. A neighbor moved in above me. It was a couple and their baby, and this baby cried for virtually 18 hours a day. It cried on and off during the night. It cried through for most of the day. The only time I got any peace from this baby's crying were those few little kind of bursts when the baby would actually sleep during the night, or if the family was just out altogether, out, out of their apartment. It seemed as if the rest of the time this child just cried all the time. There was one night where the child didn't stop crying the entire night, and I was already sort of so sleep deprived at this point. And I did not sleep a wink. I would like catch, a few minutes of sleep or 20 minutes or half an hour of sleep, and then I'd be awake for hours. And it just carried on the entire night. And at that point, I just knew that I needed to move out. So that was one situation I was in. And then that same apartment building, actually, that same apartment, but previous to that, there was a guy who lived above me who used to play incredibly, incredibly loud, sort of heavy metal music for about 2 or 3 hours, about 2 or 3 nights a week, to the point that the whole apartment building sounded like a nightclub. That's how loud it was. Um, I used to put my noise canceling headphones on with ocean white noise in it, and I could just about, you know, tolerate being inside while that music was playing, but it was so distressing to me. That was awful. And then there've been just numerous other times where I've had neighbors who've just had their TV very loud, where I share the wall and I can clearly hear the movie that they're watching, or else they'll play their music really loudly. Um, I've often had situations where I could hear them talking through the walls. I can hear them coughing. I had a previous neighbor in the previous town that I used to live where he used to kind of like hack out. So he had like a really, obviously some sort of bad lung condition of some sort. I don't know if he was a smoker or what, but he would like hack out his lungs and like make these really awful guttural noises that I could hear clearly through the walls. It was just awful. So I kind of eventually made the decision that I was never ever going to live in a house with a shared wall again. Now I realize some houses that share a wall are a lot better than others. You get over here in the UK, or Ireland anyway is where I live, but throughout the UK, and I'm sure in other parts of the world as well, you get some semi-detached houses that are particularly well built with a strong solid wall between the two houses. And they're set up in such a way that there's kind of minimal disturbance caused between the two houses that share the one wall. And at least in that sort of case, there's only one shared wall. Whereas in a lot of townhouses, apartments, and terraced houses, you're actually sharing a wall on both sides. And in particularly hellish situations, if you're in an apartment, you might be sharing a wall on either side, but also sharing a ceiling and a floor. So it can get really bad when you're talking about sharing walls, ceilings, and floors with neighbors, because even if you have a considerate neighbor today, or a quiet neighbor, or a neighbor who's hardly home today, tomorrow someone new could move in and you just don't know who you're going to get. And sadly, the world that we live in, when it comes to noise, people just aren't, for the most part, aren't as considerate as they should be. So I eventually made the decision that I was never going to live in a house with a shared wall or shared ceiling or floor again. I was only going to live in detached houses, meaning a house that's just completely self-contained on its own little, you know, plot or piece of ground, and preferably with a garden around and not too close to other houses. For me, that's probably the best way that I know to um, ensure the level of quietness that I need in order to feel sane. And that's what I live in at the moment. I live in a detached house right now. It's a really nice house in the countryside. And I would have thought that this would be kind of the ideal way to ensure peace and quiet. But even it seems in a detached house in the countryside, you're not necessarily always safe, because I have a neighbor across the road with a teenage son who's about 16, who is big into quad bikes, and he's now got some sort of car that he's modified, and it's incredibly noisy. And all the neighbors in the lane, this quiet little country lane that I live in, are in an uproar about it and hate it. But that situation could take a while to get resolved. And so in the meantime, I'm even having to put up with noise when, living in a detached house in the countryside. And so I just want to make the point that although, like, yes, uh, it's good to make smart choices about where you live if you are someone who suffers with misophonia or some sort of sound sensitivity. Um, I do stand by that. I think it is better, if possible, to live in a detached house if you can afford it, or if you have access to that in your country. I realize that's not necessarily realistic for everyone, but I do urge you to consider trying to find the most kind of quiet accommodation that you can. But even if you do find a detached house in a quiet area, like I have done, you still are faced with the possibility that you could have an inconsiderate neighbor who could make things noisy for the whole neighborhood. Unfortunately, that's always a risk. And so I suppose what the point I'm trying to get across is that we can't really escape noise. It's everywhere. Um, and so you know, the idea that you can outrun noise or that you can escape from it entirely is kind of a myth, because noise can find you no matter where you are. And I think the best thing to do is probably to minimize your exposure to noise if possible, just to give yourself some kind of breathing room, and so that you're not constantly feeling triggered. But also to realize that noise can still happen, and to be prepared with coping strategies. And so, just on that note, if you are in a situation where, if you are someone who you think you suffer from misophonia, and you are in a situation where you are being chronically triggered by sound, it can have a very debilitating effect on you. I know that when I think back to times when I was chronically triggered by noises around me, particularly during those times when I was living in apartments or townhouses where I was being chronically triggered by the sounds of my neighbors, it was a very debilitating state to be in. You're kind of feeling exhausted and worn down. And if you read up about misophonia, that exhaustion and that feeling of being drained is very real for people who have misophonia. So it's important, I suppose, to try not to get into that state where you're in a state of just being chronically drained by being triggered by noise. And I do think if you are in that state where you're surrounded by noise that's triggering you all the time, that it is worth potentially considering moving, if that is a possibility for you. Um, moving to a different, setting if you can. Um, and as I say, I know that it's not within everybody's means or circumstances to move to a detached house. Uh, but even if you can move to a cottage or to potentially a sort of quieter house share in the countryside, anything that can offer you at least some relief from your triggers is a win, in my opinion. Um, But now I want to talk a little bit about coping strategies because I think that's potentially the part of my video that will be helpful to other misophonia sufferers. Things that I have found to be very helpful for myself, and things that can help to sort of save your sanity and your emotional health when you're being triggered by noises or your trigger sounds. Um, I would say the first thing is to be ready with tools and equipment that are specifically designed to block out sounds. Um, so I'm going to list off some of the pieces of equipment that I have found to be very helpful. I'm not affiliated or sponsored by any of these products, so I'm purely sharing them because I've used them or I have bought them and I found them to be helpful. And not, I don't, benefit from, you buying these products whatsoever. Um, but I think there were a few different products that are available, thankfully, for people who have sound sensitivity. The first is earplugs, and these range from cheap to expensive. Uh, I remember during the days when I was living in an apartment and I really didn't have very much money, I just got wax earplugs from the pharmacy, and I found those to be relatively helpful to sleep in. I found them kind of like comfortable enough because you can really mold them and you can make them as big or small as you want. I found them to be quite helpful just to provide a little bit of peace while I was sleeping. Um, they're not going to block out a lot of sound, but sometimes it'll be just enough to allow you to fall asleep, uh, which is great. Um, I will say there's a company called Loop that provide earplugs that are supposed to be really, really great for misophonia sufferers. I have actually ordered a pair because I've heard good things about them. My pair is actually supposed to be arriving this week. I've ordered the Loop Quiet earplugs, which are their strongest ones, and they're supposed to block sounds of up to 24 decibels. So they're ones that just kind of fit quite snugly in your ear, and they do, block out a lot of sounds that are commonly triggering for people with misophonia. They have milder ones available to purchase as well, ones that don't block out as much sound, but ones which people can kind of have in all day, that they can still hear people talking to them. They can still hear a lot of everyday sounds, but they're earplugs that are kind of designed to trigger out, sorry, to block out some of those sort of triggering sounds. So check out Loop if you're interested. If you want to get a pair of good quality earplugs, I'll let you know when my Loop earplugs arrive. I will maybe do another video just describing how they work and how I'm enjoying them. But I've ordered the Loop Quiet earplugs, just to potentially wear when I come home from work if I'm worried about the neighbor's son being out on his quad bike or his motorbike or his rally car or what have you. I'm dreading hearing that initial kind of revving of the engine, and so I might just pop my Loop earplugs in straight away when I get home from work. Um, so earplugs are something I recommend that you have on hand. The second thing that you can also use, and you can even use them over earplugs, are noise cancelling headphones. Now, again, these range from like fairly cheap. I saw Argos selling a pair of Bluetooth noise cancelling headphones for £50. And then they go all the way up to about £300 or £400 for the really kind of great quality, expensive ones sold by, I think it's Bose, is it? Bose? I don't know how you say that company name, that brand. But those Bose noise cancelling headphones are supposed to be really, really brilliant. And so headphones, noise cancelling headphones are just kind of ordinary over ear headphones that allow you to listen to music or whatever you want to listen to inside the headphones, but then they have an extra feature that blocks out a lot of external sounds. I have a pair of noise cancelling headphones. They're not Bluetooth, unfortunately, so I don't actually use them all that often. And I was considering buying another pair of noise cancelling headphones, like a Bluetooth pair. But I actually find they're not strong enough for me as someone who has misophonia. I think noise cancelling headphones are great if you're trying to block out just fairly quiet external noises, like just things that are just a little bit distracting, just kind of everyday sounds like a bit of traffic or maybe dogs barking or some, sort of quiet, like, or not very loud external distractions, and you want to focus on what you're listening to. Noise cancelling headphones are great for that. But for someone with misophonia, where you're very sensitive to the noise and where that noise is very triggering to you, and where the noise might actually be quite loud, as in the case of me with the neighbor's teenager and his revving car, I find noise cancelling headphones are just not enough to do the job. So that brings me to my next recommendation, which is I've actually ordered myself a pair of ear defenders, which are a step up from noise cancelling headphones. Ear defenders are actually earmuffs used by people who work in industrial settings or with power tools, where they need to block out quite a lot of the noise of the machines that they're working with or of the environment that they're working in order to not damage their hearing. So ear defenders like fit very kind of, they almost suction over your ears. They fit very, very snugly over your ears, and they block out more noise than noise cancelling headphones. The ear defenders that I have ordered block out noises of up to 30 decibels. So what I've read actually on the Misophonia subreddit is that if you use the Loop Quiet earplugs with ear defenders over them, you'll actually get close to complete silence, which I think is pretty awesome. So I'm going to try it out, and I'll let you know if that is actually true, if that actually, if it is actually completely silent. But I'm really looking forward to trying out the two together. Now, the ear defenders that I've ordered are Bluetooth enabled, so although they block out up to 30 decibels of noise, of outside noise, you can still listen to something inside the earphones, which was important for me because I love to listen to YouTube videos and podcasts and music. And I think it's particularly helpful if you are trying to distract yourself from outside noises to have something else to listen to. So for me, it was important to get Bluetooth enabled ear defenders. So just be careful about that. If you're thinking of buying ear defenders, just ask yourself whether you want just ones that provide, that are just quiet, or whether you want ones where you can hear something inside the earphones as well, which are a bit more expensive, but I think kind of worth the price. So that's just something I wanted to point out. Just try to decide for yourself whether you want noise cancelling headphones or ear defenders. Maybe consider getting earplugs on top of that for that extra layer of protection for your ears. But I think these are tools that we can use as people who are sensitive to sound, just to kind of try and lower the intensity, lower the volume, to use a pun, I suppose, lower the volume on our emotions when we are triggered by a sound. And I think even to just be prepared with having that equipment close by, those earplugs, those headphones close by, so that you can quickly put them on when you hear the trigger sound, I think is very helpful, because I think for me it would potentially stop my brain getting into that spiral, that loop of thoughts that will cause those intense negative emotions of anxiety and anger for me. Um, so I've talked about earplugs, I've talked about headphones and ear defenders. Um, Another very, very helpful tool that I want to talk about is white noise. Now, you can also get brown noise and pink noise. I don't know too much about those, but basically the difference between white noise, brown noise, and pink noise is which sounds they tend to block out. So it really is just a personal preference. It just depends which sounds particularly trigger you and what sounds the most pleasant to your ears and to your brain, in terms of, do you prefer white noise, pink noise, brown noise, and which types of white, pink, and brown noises do you like? I know some people are quite clever and even know how to layer the different noises in order to really block out triggers very well. I don't quite know how to do that. But for me, having white noise is incredibly helpful. There have been times when having white noise on has literally saved my sanity. I don't think I would have been able to get through those periods of noise without white noise. It's been a lifesaver. So, what am I talking about when I say white noise? It's background noise that's kind of, for me, white noise is it's noise in the background that is soothing, consistent, very kind of it doesn't have a lot of kind of there are no harsh ups and downs. There's nothing in the white noise to trigger me. It's just kind of a very kind of soothing background noise that I can put on that is going to try and sort of, it will kind of melt away the trigger sounds a little bit, and make them less noticeable. Because the principle with white noise is that you're giving your brain something else to focus on. You don't want to, it's not always helpful to just eliminate noise altogether. Sometimes you actually need to give your brain a different noise to focus on, or something to drown out the trigger sound. So I couldn't recommend white noise highly enough. As I say, it's really been a lifesaver for me at times. There was one time when I was living in an apartment, and the apartment sort of diagonally opposite and down from me had extremely noisy children that used to play in the garden. And they used to scream for like 4 hours, 4, 5, 6 hours every afternoon in the garden. And it was a tiny garden, and there were like 4 children. And it just, I used to get so distressed by that noise. And I bought myself a standing fan. So I personally think fans are a fantastic form of white noise. They're very cheap. You know, you can get a fan incredibly cheaply, and they'll all provide some sort of a degree of white noise. So I got a standing fan, and I would just have it on like medium or high setting, and it would just kind of fill my apartment with this humming, whirring sound that would drown out a lot of the children's shouting and screaming. And it was really, really helpful. There was another occasion where I lived in a cottage which was very close to a busy road. And so there was pretty much constant traffic, and it was very loud. And initially, when I moved in there, I thought I was going to go insane. I was just, um, I was, really, really struggling with the traffic noise, and it was very distressing to me. And I bought a small heater fan. So I'm sure most of you have seen these, that you get these like small white heater fans. They're great because they double as a fan and a heater, so they generally have like a cold and a warm setting. They're very cheap usually, and they're very effective as either a fan or a heater. And so you can switch up the temperature depending on whether it's winter or summer. But I just had this going in my lounge on fan setting throughout the whole day. I was working from home at this time, and I just had the fan on the whole day, and I just found it to be so, so, so helpful in blocking out the worst of the traffic noise. And eventually, it actually got to the point where I started to tune out the traffic noise, and I eventually just started to notice it less and less, and it just bothered me less and less. And I eventually just kind of got used to it, which is pretty amazing. That can happen with noise sensitivity. It won't always happen and it's not a guarantee, but I have noticed that sometimes if you are willing to kind of face your trigger in a way that feels safe to you, and you're willing to kind of um, experiment with different coping strategies and explore your anxiety and like face your anxiety and work to kind of soothe the anxiety instead of running away from it, sometimes the noise sensitivity can actually improve over time. And conversely, what I've read, and I don't 100% know if this is true because there's not a lot of research on misophonia, but what I have read is that retreating from your trigger noises entirely can actually make your triggers worse. It can actually worsen your misophonia and make it harder and harder over time to face those triggers, and it can make your anxiety surrounding those triggers worse. So I do think that there is potentially something to be said for finding ways to face the triggers associated with misophonia, and for truly exploring ways that we can kind of maybe learn to live in the world, you know, noises and all. Obviously, we want to always try and make it as safe as possible for ourselves, and we don't want to unnecessarily distress ourselves. Please, I would never want to advocate for that. I always believe that you should live in a peaceful and quiet environment. But the more we can maybe explore options to help us cope, I think potentially the stronger and more empowered we'll feel, and maybe, the more we can start to get a handle on this condition called misophonia. So I would strongly recommend white noise, as just to get back to that point that I was making. A standing fan is a great source of white noise, or a ceiling fan. Even I think ceiling fans are quieter than standing fans. So you might, depending on how loud the noise is, you should adjust the volume of the white noise accordingly. So a fan is a great option, either like a small heater fan type thing, or else a standing fan. You can also get white noise machines, which are great. I have one. Just bought it on Amazon for £20. And it has different white noise settings on it. It has birds or crickets chirping, I think. It's like insect sounds or bird sounds. I can't quite work out what they are. I think it's kind of insect sounds is the one. It has thunder and rain is another one. Then it has wind. It has like a rushing river. It's got ocean sounds, and then it has a hair dryer. So if I'm not mistaken, those are the different sound settings. Those are the different types of white noise that it generates. But if you look for white noise machine on Amazon, or just Google it, you can find white noise machines. And I used to find this very helpful to sleep with. When I lived in a townhouse where I shared a wall, if my neighbor was watching a film that I could hear, and as I say, I was very sensitive to that noise. So even if it wasn't all that loud, I could still hear it. But then I would put my white noise machine on. I would put it on to like ocean sounds, which is the one I like. And and it comes with a timer, so you can set it for like half an hour or an hour, and then it'll play for that length of time, and then it'll automatically switch itself off. So those are great. I believe you can also get rain machines. I think those are particularly nice for like babies and small children to sleep with, but I would imagine they work well for adults too. Another source of white noise is to get a water feature. You could get like a water feature, an internal water feature for your house, if that is something that would be practical, or even just for just outside your house that provides like a it provides like a constant just gurgling water noise that could also drown out a lot of external noises. Some people have really loud fridges that like have a consistent humming noise. Now, not everyone might like that, but I actually personally find that to be a very pleasant white noise because it tends to drown out a lot of those sort of smaller trigger noises, things that might trigger me. I just find that the humming of the fridge. I have a friend who has quite a loud fridge, and I find when I'm at their house, I can't really hear anything else aside from just this gentle humming of the fridge, and it's quite a peaceful sound. So I think it's that, that can be um, a good option as well. To get a fridge with a like almost a built-in white noise. Another option is a dehumidifier. That can also be a very useful form of white noise. They also provide like a kind of quite consistent, nice humming noise that can just blend into the background and drown out a lot of trigger noises. Or else there are lots of white noise tracks here on YouTube. Plenty of white noise tracks. Um, I used to play those inside my noise cancelling headphones when I was living in that particularly noisy apartment. So those are great as well. And again, there are different varieties of white noise tracks. I personally didn't really like the thunder and rain ones. I found there to be too many um, there's too many ups and downs in the rain and noise white noise tracks. I didn't like those. I preferred the ocean noises, like the waves crashing. I found that to be a lot more soothing. So just experiment, just see which ones sound the most soothing and appealing to your ears, and which ones you prefer. Um, but I think that's all I've got for you on the topic of. I know I've been speaking for ages about misophonia at this point, over an hour. And, I would love to answer any questions that you might have. I'm not an expert, I'm just someone who has experienced misophonia for most of my life. And if you have any experiences you want to share with me, I'd welcome you to leave them in the comments, or any tips or coping strategies that you've found helpful to help you deal with your misophonia. I do just want to end by kind of coming back to a point I made a little while ago about facing our triggers and trying not to let the fear of those trigger sounds overpower us or run our lives. I know it can be very tempting. Um, and I don't blame anyone for feeling that overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety. I've obviously experienced that myself. So this is not coming from a place of, I have all the answers and I know what I'm doing, because I'm definitely just figuring this out along with everybody else. But I do think that it's worth doing what we can to try and work with this condition and to work with our feelings and to try and face our feelings and our triggers, and seeing how we can work with our lives in order to make them more supportive. Have conversations with people, with your loved ones, with bosses and co-workers and neighbors. Just try and talk to them about your noise sensitivity, instead of letting our misophonia cause us to retreat from the world, letting it make us kind of reclusive, or being scared of the world and being scared of being triggered, to just see how we could kind of face the world and try to get the world to take notice of us and become more aware of misophonia. If there's one change I wish I could make to the world, it would be to make people more considerate when it comes to noise pollution. You know, it's so distressing to me to know how people suffer because of intensely loud noises. Not just people, but animals and nature as well. It's not good for animals to be exposed to very loud noises, and I just wish that the world at large was more thoughtful and sensitive and considerate to noise pollution. And I wish that, loud noises and inconsiderate noises were not such a big problem, that they weren't so prevalent. I wish everyone was just a bit more thoughtful when it comes to the noise that they produce. But at the same time, I would love to see people with misophonia speaking up and advocating for themselves, and potentially trying to get accommodations put in place when it comes to places they live, places they work, public places like restaurants and the bus and public transport, that sort of thing. But then also, in addition, um, consistently being creative and imaginative and taking ownership and control of their own condition, and working to implement coping strategies for themselves so that they don't feel like they need to live in a protective bubble and kind of retreat from the world completely, and they do feel empowered to take the condition into their own hands. That's what I'm trying to do, and I hope that I can encourage you to do the same. And if you are someone who has misophonia, please know that you have my enduring empathy and support, and that I feel for you, and I know what it's like. And I am wishing you all the very best on your journey to living with this condition. I'll see all of you next time. Bye, everyone.